Running Elk felt the dying twins' heartbeats flutter against his chest as he carried their unconscious mother across sacred Apache ground where no outsider was permitted to live. When his tribe discovered his betrayal of their most ancient law, they would demand blood. His own. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The wind howled like 1,000 angry spirits across the snow-covered mountains of northern Arizona territory. Winter of 1875 had arrived with merciless fury, transforming the familiar landscape into a treacherous expanse of white that concealed dangers beneath its pristine surface. Running Elk moved with deliberate precision through the blinding snowfall, his tall frame wrapped in layers of deer hide and fur, his face partially obscured by a scarf of woven wool that protected him from the biting cold. At 28 winters, he was one of the most respected warriors of the Black Mountain Apache band. His hunting skills were unmatched, his tracking abilities legendary among his people. The elders spoke his name with pride, the children watched him with awe, and the young women cast shy glances his way when he returned from successful hunts. But Running Elk carried his status with quiet humility, his dark eyes revealing little of the thoughts that moved like shadows behind them. Today, he traveled alone through the sacred hunting grounds that had belonged to his people since before memory. The snowstorm had caught him during his return journey from a solitary meditation retreat in the high caves, a ritual he undertook each winter to commune with the spirits and renew his connection to the land. No other tribal members would venture here during such weather, especially to this particular valley that the elders had declared Nadau Bike, land of spirits, where only those with special permission could tread. The laws governing these grounds were ancient and uncompromising. No outsider could set foot here without desecrating the sacred soil. No white settler, no enemy tribesman, no stranger of any kind was permitted. Such trespass was punishable by death among his people, not from cruelty, but from the deeply held belief that the ancestral spirits dwelling here must remain undisturbed by those who did not understand their ways. Running Elk himself had sworn to uphold these laws when he had been initiated as a warrior 15 winters ago. The ceremony remained vivid in his memory. The smoke from sacred herbs filling his lungs, the rhythmic drumming that matched his heartbeat, the ancient words spoken by Chief Grey Thunder as he pledged to protect their ways, their lands, their traditions with his life if necessary. A warrior who breaks sacred law is no warrior at all, Grey Thunder had told him that night. He becomes less than the dust beneath our feet. These words whispered in his mind now as the wind shifted suddenly, carrying a sound that did not belong to the wilderness. Running Elk froze, his senses instantly alert. There, almost lost in the howling gale, a high-pitched wail that could only be human. Not just human, a child. His first instinct was to turn away. White settlers had encroached increasingly on Apache lands in recent years, bringing with them disease, conflict, and the strange black-robed men who sought to change their ancient ways. Whatever trouble had befallen them in this forbidden place was not his concern. The law was clear, yet something pulled at him, a sensation he could not name. The child's cry came again, weaker this time, and Running Elk found his feet moving forward against his better judgment. Just to look, he told himself, just to know what trespassed on sacred ground. He crested a small rise and looked down into a shallow ravine. There, half buried in snow, lay the broken remains of a small wagon. One wheel spun lazily in the wind, its axle shattered. A single horse lay dead in its traces, already becoming a white mound as the snow accumulated on its still form. And there, huddled against the side of the wagon, barely visible beneath a snow-dusted blanket, was a woman. She was young, perhaps 24 summers, with hair the color of autumn wheat partially visible beneath a woolen bonnet. Her face was deathly pale, lips tinged blue from cold, and her eyes were closed. She might have been dead already, except for the slight movement of her chest and the precious bundles she clutched tightly against her. Two infants, so small they could not have seen more than a few weeks of life, were wrapped together in what appeared to be a quilt. Their cries had weakened to whimpers now, their tiny faces red from cold and hunger. The woman's arms remained locked around them even in her unconscious state, a mother's instinct to protect overriding even the grip of approaching death. Running Elk stood motionless, conflict raging within him. The law was absolute. These people did not belong here. They were trespassers on sacred land. To help them would be to betray everything he had sworn to uphold. His people would not understand, could not understand such a transgression. Yet as he watched, one of the infants turned its face toward him, eyes opening briefly to reveal a startling blue before closing again in exhaustion. Something shifted in Running Elk's chest, a sensation both unfamiliar and undeniable. "The spirits did not place me here to watch innocents die," he whispered in his native tongue, the words disappearing into the swirling snow. His decision made, Running Elk moved swiftly down the slope toward the wagon, knowing that every moment mattered now. The woman did not stir as he approached, her breathing shallow and fading. Hypothermia had nearly claimed her. The infants would not survive much longer exposed to such cold. With careful movements, Running Elk gathered the woman and her precious cargo into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile in a way that surprised him. The twins made no sound as he adjusted them securely against their mother's chest, their tiny bodies growing dangerously still. "Live," he commanded them in Apache, his voice firm as if ordering young warriors. "Fight until we reach shelter." With his burden secure, Running Elk turned toward the eastern ridges where he knew of a cave system that would provide shelter from the storm. It would mean several hours of difficult travel through deepening snow, but he saw no alternative. As he took the first steps away from the wagon, he felt the weight of his choice settling upon his shoulders, heavier than the woman and children in his arms. He had broken sacred law, and when his people discovered what he had done, there would be consequences he could scarcely imagine. The journey to the eastern caves was brutal. Each step demanded all of Running Elk's strength as he navigated the treacherous terrain, his moccasins crunching through snow that reached past his knees in some places. The woman remained unconscious in his arms, her breathing growing more shallow with each passing minute. The infants had fallen silent, a dangerous sign that chilled him more than the bitter wind that clawed at his face. He knew these mountains like he knew his own heartbeat, each ridge and valley as familiar to him as the lines on his palm. Even blinded by snow, his instincts guided him unerringly toward the hidden network of caves that few outside his tribe knew existed. These caverns had sheltered Apache hunters for generations, their walls adorned with ancient paintings depicting successful hunts and spirit journeys. "Stay with me," he murmured to his unconscious charges, unsure if he spoke to the woman, the infants, or perhaps to the spirits themselves, asking for their understanding of his transgression. After what seemed like an eternity, the dark mouth of the largest cave appeared before him, a shadow against the white landscape. Relief surged through him as he ducked inside, the sudden absence of howling wind almost disorienting. The temperature was noticeably warmer here, protected from the brutal elements outside. Running Elk moved deeper into the cave, to a chamber he knew well. He gently laid the woman down on a flat stone shelf, still cradling the infants to prevent them from falling. Working quickly, he retrieved dry firewood from a storage niche, provisions left by tribal hunters for emergencies, and soon had a small fire crackling to life, its warm glow illuminating the cave walls. Only then did he carefully examine his charges. The woman's skin remained frighteningly pale, her lips blue-tinged from cold. Her simple dress was soaked through, her threadbare coat providing little protection against the elements. The twins, a boy and a girl from what he could determine, were wrapped more adequately in the quilt, but their tiny bodies had grown dangerously cold. Running Elk knew what needed to be done, though the intimacy of it made him hesitate. Among his people, touching an unknown woman in such a way would be unthinkable, but survival demanded action beyond custom. With practiced efficiency, he removed the woman's wet outer garments, leaving her in her underclothes for modesty's sake, and wrapped her in dry fur blankets he kept stored in the cave. He placed the infants directly against their mother's skin, knowing her body heat, once restored, would be their best chance for survival. Then he covered them all with more furs. Next, he prepared a medicinal tea from herbs in his travel pouch, a mixture of willow bark, yarrow, and other plants his grandmother had taught him to use for treating cold sickness. When it had steeped to proper strength, he carefully lifted the woman's head and managed to get a few drops between her lips. As he worked, Running Elk studied the woman more closely. Her hands, though delicate, showed signs of hard work, not the smooth palms of a woman of leisure. A simple gold band circled her finger, though her clothing suggested she had little wealth. Most telling was a small locket around her neck, which had fallen open to reveal a daguerreotype of a man with a serious expression and the same striking blue eyes as the infant's. Her husband, Running Elk surmised. But where was he now? What had brought this woman alone to such a perilous journey through sacred Apache lands with newborn babes? The questions lingered in his mind as he settled across the fire from his unexpected guests, watching the slow rise and fall of the woman's chest. The immediate danger had passed, but their situation remained precarious. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, and even if it did, the woman was in no condition to travel. As the hours passed, Running Elk maintained his vigil, periodically adding wood to the fire and administering small amounts of medicinal tea to the unconscious woman. The infants occasionally whimpered, and he awkwardly attempted to soothe them, humming low melodies he remembered from his own childhood. It was near dawn when the woman finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened to reveal eyes the color of the summer sky. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, her gaze unfocused as it drifted around the unfamiliar cave. Then awareness flooded back, and she gasped, arms instinctively tightening around the infants at her sides. "My babies," she whispered, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "They live," Running Elk replied in careful English. He had learned the language years ago from a missionary who had visited their settlement briefly before being sent away by the tribal elders. His words were accented but clear. The woman's gaze shot to him, eyes widening with fear as she registered his presence. She tried to sit up, then winced in pain, her face paling further. "Who?" she began, then swallowed hard. "Where am I?" "Safe cave." "Storm outside." Running Elk kept his distance, recognizing the fear in her eyes. He had seen that look before from white settlers. Fear of the savage Indian they had been warned about. "I bring you here from snow. Wagon broken." Memory seemed to return to her then, her expression shifting from fear to desperation. The wagon, everything we had. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, focusing instead on the infants. Emma. James. Are they truly all right? Running Elk nodded. They strong, like mother. The woman studied him warily, conflict evident in her expression, gratitude warring with the fear that had been instilled in her about his kind. Finally, necessity seemed to win out over prejudice. "I'm Sarah," she said quietly, "Sarah Coleman, and I thank you for saving us." "Running Elk," he replied, touching his chest. He hesitated, then added, "You on sacred Apache land, forbidden to outsiders." Sarah's face paled further. "I didn't know. The maps showed this as unclaimed territory. I was trying to reach Silver Creek before the worst of the storm hit, but the wheel broke, and then the horse." She trailed off, the horror of her near-death experience finally seeming to register fully. Running Elk nodded once, his expression grave. "Rest now. Talk later." As he turned back to tend the fire, his thoughts were troubled. The woman, Sarah, seemed honest in her ignorance of where she had trespassed, but that would matter little to the tribal elders if they discovered what he had done. And with each passing hour in this cave, Running Elk was moving further beyond the boundaries of tribal law into territory from which there might be no return. The storm raged for 2 more days, shrouding the mountains in impenetrable white and trapping them together in the cave's confines. During this time, a cautious understanding began to form between Running Elk and Sarah Coleman, necessity bridging the vast divide between their worlds. Sarah grew stronger with each passing hour, though exhaustion still claimed her frequently. When awake, she tended to her twins with a fierce devotion that Running Elk found himself admiring. Emma, the girl, seemed to have inherited her mother's resilience, her tiny fists batting at the air with surprising strength. James, however, worried them both. His breathing sometimes grew labored, and he refused to nurse as eagerly as his sister. "He was smaller at birth," Sarah explained softly as she cradled the fussing infant. "The doctor said he might not survive, but I refused to believe it." Her voice hardened with determination. "I won't lose him now." Running Elk knelt beside them, examining the infant with a critical eye. "Breath sickness," he said finally. "Grandmother teach medicine for this." Without waiting for permission, he began crushing dried herbs from his pouch, mixing them with melted snow to create a pungent paste. Sarah watched him warily. "Ooh, what is that?" "White pine, mullein leaf, little honey." He worked the mixture between his fingers. "Open his clothes." She hesitated only briefly before complying, her trust born of desperation. Running Elk spread the paste across the infant's tiny chest with surprising gentleness for hands so accustomed to weapons. "Keep warm," he instructed. Medicine helped breathe. As they waited anxiously for signs of improvement, Sarah finally spoke of what had brought her to this desperate situation. "My husband, Thomas, died 3 months ago. Fever took him in just 5 days." Her fingers absently touched the locket at her throat. "I was already 7 months along with the twins. We had a small farm near Fort Gibson, but it turned out Thomas had debts I never knew about. His creditors gave me until spring to pay, but..." She swallowed hard. "They changed their minds. Said a woman alone couldn't run the farm anyway. They were coming to take everything the next day." Running Elk listened silently, his face impassive, though his eyes registered understanding. "I packed what I could in our wagon and left that night. Thomas had a brother in Silver Creek who doesn't even know about the twins yet. I thought, Her voice broke. "I thought we could make it." "Brave journey," Running Elk said simply, "for Mother Bear protecting cubs." Something flickered in Sarah's eyes, surprise at his understanding, perhaps, or at the respect evident in his tone. "Your English is very good," she observed. "Mission school, 2 summers." "Before elders say no more white man teaching, and your people. They truly forbid all outsiders on this land." Running Elk's expression grew grave. "This place, Nadao Bike, land of spirits, most sacred. Only special Apache may come here." He looked directly into her eyes. "Law say help outsider on sacred land is betrayal." Sarah paled. "Then why did you help us?" The question hung between them, demanding an answer. Running Elk himself wasn't sure he fully understood. He stared into the fire, searching for words. "Life is sacred too," he finally said. "Children innocent, their spirit path just beginning." The simplicity and depth of his answer seemed to touch Sarah deeply. She looked down at James, whose breathing had already grown less labored from Running Elk's medicine. "What will happen when your people find out?" she asked quietly. "Punishment," he replied without elaboration. The severity of his potential fate was not something he wished to burden her with. On the 3rd morning, the storm finally relented, though deep snow still blanketed the landscape. James had improved significantly, his color better, his appetite returned. Running Elk ventured outside briefly, assessing conditions and hunting a snowshoe hare that provided them with fresh meat and renewed strength. As Sarah watched him skillfully prepare the meat, her curiosity about his life grew. "Do you have a family? A wife waiting for you?" Running Elk shook his head. "Not married. Was to be matched with Chief's daughter after winter ceremony." His expression remained neutral, but something in his voice suggested this plan might now be in jeopardy. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, understanding the implication. "I've ruined that for you." "My choice," he replied firmly. "No regret." That evening, as the twins slept peacefully between them, Sarah hesitantly offered Running Elk the chance to hold Emma, who had been watching him with curious eyes. His hands, so sure when stringing a bow or tracking game, trembled slightly as he cradled the tiny girl. Emma reached up, her small fingers grasping one of his, and a rare smile transformed his serious features. The tender moment shattered with a sound that sent ice through Running Elk's veins. The distant but unmistakable call of an Apache hunting horn. His people were in the mountains, perhaps searching for him after his prolonged absence. Sarah recognized the change in him instantly. "What is it?" "My people come," Running Elk said, carefully returning Emma to her mother's arms. He moved to the cave entrance, listening intently. The horn call came again, closer this time. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Running Elk turned to her, his face set with determination. "Not long, must prepare." The reckoning he had known would come was now upon them. Whatever happened next would forever change the course of both their lives. Running Elk moved with swift purpose, gathering his few belongings and checking the cave entrance repeatedly. The hunting horns sounded again, their haunting calls echoing through the mountains. There was no question now. A search party had been sent to find him, and they were closing in. "They must not find you here," he told Sarah, his voice low and urgent. "Cave has hidden chamber." Deeper inside, Sarah was already bundling the twins, her movements quick but careful. "Will they hurt you?" she asked, looking up at him with genuine concern that surprised him. Running Elk hesitated, unwilling to lie. "Depends on who leads search. Grey Thunder fair, but strict. Stone Bear." He shook his head slightly, leaving the implications unspoken. "I won't hide while you face them alone," Sarah said with unexpected firmness. "You risked everything to save us. I won't make you bear this burden by yourself." Running Elk stared at her, struck by the courage of this white woman who, despite her weakness and the dangers facing her, refused the safer path. It was a warrior's spirit he recognized in her, the kind his people respected above all else. Before he could respond, a sharp whistle pierced the air outside, a signal between Apache scouts. They were much closer than he had estimated. "No time," Running Elk muttered. He grasped Sarah's shoulders gently but firmly, his dark eyes intense. "Say nothing unless asked. Show respect. Hold children close." He paused, then added, "Whatever happens, I chose this path." Sarah nodded, clutching her twins to her chest as Emma began to fuss, perhaps sensing her mother's tension. Running Elk moved to stand at the cave entrance, drawing himself to his full height, shoulders squared as he awaited his tribesmen. They appeared through the swirling snow like spirits materializing from the white void. 5 Apache warriors on foot, their movements fluid despite the difficult terrain. Running Elk recognized each face with a sinking heart. At the forefront walked Stone Bear, the tribe's most feared warrior and Running Elk's longtime rival. Behind him came White Knife, a young hunter who had always looked up to Running Elk, Cloudwalker, one of the tribal elders, and 2 other warriors who served as Stone Bear's closest allies. Stone Bear halted several paces from the cave entrance, his face hardening as he took in the scene, Running Elk standing protectively before a white woman and her infants. His hand instinctively moved toward the knife at his belt, but Cloudwalker placed a restraining hand on his arm. "What abomination is this?" Stone Bear demanded in Apache, his voice laced with disgust. "You bring white trespassers to sacred ground. You shelter them in hunters' caves." Running Elk responded in the same language, his voice steady despite the tension vibrating through his body. "I found them dying in the snow. The woman unconscious, the infants near frozen. I could not leave them to perish." "You should have," Stone Bear spat. "Better they die than defile this land with their presence. You know our laws." Cloudwalker stepped forward, his weathered face grave but his eyes keenly observant. Unlike Stone Bear's open hostility, the elder's demeanor remained measured as he studied first Running Elk, then Sarah and her children. "Ooh, why have you done this, son of many horses?" Cloudwalker asked, using Running Elk's father's name as was customary in formal address. "You, who have always honored our ways above all else. You, who were chosen to marry Grey Thunder's daughter when the spring comes." Running Elk met the elder's gaze directly. "I have no words that will make this right in your eyes, respected elder. I can only say that when I found them, the choice before me was clear. I could not call myself Apache, a human being, if I had left innocent children to die." Stone Bear made a dismissive gesture. "Sentiment, weakness. The white man's god has poisoned your mind with their talk of mercy." He turned to Cloudwalker. "We should take him back now. Let Grey Thunder decide his punishment. As for the woman and her offspring," his hand moved again to his knife. White Knife, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "The law forbids harming children, Stone Bear, even enemy children. You know this." Stone Bear rounded on the younger warrior. "You dare lecture me on our laws while standing before the greatest violation of them? They are on sacred ground. Their mere presence is a defilement. The defilement is already done," Cloudwalker said quietly. "Killing them will not undo it. Only proper ceremony can cleanse this place." He turned back to Running Elk. "The woman, can she travel?" "Not far," Running Elk replied. She nearly died in the storm. The boy child has lung sickness." Cloudwalker's face remained impassive, but Running Elk could see the conflict in the old man's eyes. The elder had always been fair, respecting the complex balance between tribal law and deeper spiritual truths. After a long moment, Cloudwalker spoke again. "This matter is for Grey Thunder to judge. Running Elk will return with us to face the council. The woman and children—" He paused, considering. "They will come also. Their fate is tied to his now." Stonebear's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You suggest bringing white trespassers into our winter camp, letting them see our defenses, our supplies, our families. Would you rather leave them here, knowing the location of our sacred hunting caves?" Cloudwalker countered. "Or would you have us kill a mother and her babes, bringing blood guilt upon our people?" He shook his head firmly. "No, Grey Thunder must see them. He must understand fully what Running Elk has done and why." Stonebear glared at Running Elk with undisguised hatred. "He has betrayed us, betrayed our ways for white strangers. There can be only one punishment for such treachery." Sarah, who had been watching this exchange with growing anxiety despite not understanding the words, suddenly stepped forward. Though she trembled visibly, her voice was clear as she addressed them in English. "Please, whatever he's done wrong was done to save us. If someone must be punished, punish me. I'm the one who trespassed on your lands, though I didn't know they were forbidden." Running Elk quickly translated her words, impressed by her courage, even as he worried it might inflame the situation further. White Knife looked surprised, clearly not expecting such boldness from a white woman. Cloudwalker's expression softened almost imperceptibly, while Stonebear's scowl only deepened. "She speaks with a brave heart," Cloudwalker acknowledged, "but this changes nothing. The law is the law." He turned to Running Elk. "Prepare her for the journey. We leave within the hour. Grey Thunder awaits our return." As the Apache warriors retreated a short distance to confer among themselves, Running Elk turned to Sarah, his expression grave. "We go to my village," he explained quietly. "Chief Grey Thunder will decide our fate." Sarah clutched her babies tighter. "And if he decides against us?" Running Elk's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw fear in them, not for himself, but for her and the twins. "Then I will find a way," he promised, though they both knew it was a vow he might not be able to keep. The journey to the Apache winter camp was arduous. Cloudwalker had brought 2 spare horses, but with the deep snow and Sarah's weakened condition, their progress was painfully slow. Running Elk insisted Sarah ride one horse while he carried the twins in a makeshift sling across his chest, keeping them warm against his body. Stonebear watched this arrangement with thinly veiled contempt, muttering in Apache about warriors reduced to nursemaids. White Knife led the way, breaking trail through snow that sometimes reached the horses' knees. Cloudwalker rode beside Sarah, occasionally glancing at her with an inscrutable expression. Though he spoke no English, his presence beside her rather than with the other warriors seemed a deliberate choice. Perhaps protection, perhaps simply curiosity about this white woman who had unwittingly caused such turmoil. By midday, Sarah's strength was flagging visibly. Her face had grown pale again, her hands trembling as they gripped the crude saddle. Running Elk noticed immediately and called for a brief rest, earning a scornful look from Stonebear. "The woman weakens our pace," Stonebear said in Apache as they stopped beside a frozen stream. We should have left her. "And tell Grey Thunder we abandoned a mother and her children in the wilderness," White Knife countered. "What honor would there be in that?" Stonebear's hand moved to his knife. "Watch your tongue, boy. You forget your place." "Enough," Cloudwalker's voice cut through the tension. "We are Apache warriors, not squabbling children." Running Elk's judgment will come from Grey Thunder, not from us on the trail. During this exchange, Running Elk moved to Sarah's side, offering her water from his own pouch. The twins had begun fussing in their sling, and Sarah reached for them with visible relief. "How much farther?" she asked quietly, as she took James into her arms. The infant's breathing remained labored, but Running Elk's medicine had kept the worst of the sickness at bay. "Before nightfall," Running Elk replied, carefully handing Emma to her next camp in protected valley. "Many shelters, warm." Sarah nodded, her eyes revealing the fear she worked to keep from her voice. "These men, they hate me, hate us." Running Elk glanced toward the others, then back to Sarah. "Not hate, fear change. Fear outsiders bring bad spirits, bad ways." He hesitated, then added, "Stone Bear loses most if I am not punished. He wants to marry Morning Sky too." "Morning Sky? Chief's daughter." Running Elk's expression remained stoic, but something flickered in his eyes. Not regret, exactly, but acknowledgement of what he stood to lose. Match would make Stone Bear next chief someday. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. So this isn't just about tribal law. It's about power. Running Elk didn't respond directly, but his silence was confirmation enough. Politics existed in all societies, and the Apache were no exception. His actions had upset carefully laid plans and alliances, giving his rivals ammunition against him that went beyond religious transgression. The brief rest ended all too soon. As they continued their journey, the mountains gradually gave way to rolling foothills. The landscape changed, becoming more sparsely wooded, with protected valleys nestled between ridges. In one such valley, smoke from multiple fires rose in thin columns against the late afternoon sky, the first sign of the Apache winter camp. Sarah tensed visibly at the sight. Running Elk moved his horse closer to hers, not touching her but offering his presence as reassurance. "Remember," he said quietly, "speak only when spoken to. Look at ground, not faces. Show respect." She nodded, squaring her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "I understand." Their approach did not go unnoticed. Sentries positioned on the ridges had spotted them long before they reached the valley floor, sending runners ahead to alert the camp. By the time their small party rode between the first dwellings, conical wickiups covered with animal hides and brush for winter insulation, a crowd had gathered to witness their arrival. The silence was unnerving. No shouts, no calls of welcome, just dozens of dark eyes watching with a mixture of suspicion, anger, and disbelief at the sight of a white woman and infants entering their sacred winter grounds. Children ducked behind their mothers' skirts, elders whispered among themselves, and warriors stood with hands resting significantly on weapon hilts. At the center of the camp stood a large structure, more elaborate than the others, Grey Thunder's dwelling. Before it waited the chief himself, a tall man of perhaps 60 winters whose bearing radiated authority. His face was deeply lined, his long hair streaked with silver, but his eyes remained sharp as flint. Beside him stood a young woman whose beauty was striking even by Apache standards, Morning Sky, his daughter, and Running Elk's intended bride. Her expression as she watched their approach was complex: shock at seeing Running Elk escorting a white woman, confusion that transformed rapidly to understanding, and finally, a flash of something that might have been hurt before her features composed themselves into careful neutrality. Stone Bear rode ahead, dismounting with fluid grace before Grey Thunder. He spoke rapidly in Apache, his gestures becoming more animated as he described finding Running Elk harboring the white woman in the sacred hunting caves. Cloudwalker occasionally interjected, his calmer tones providing balance to Stonebear's inflammatory account. Throughout this exchange, Running Elk remained mounted beside Sarah, his face impassive, though his eyes never left Grey Thunder's. The chief listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Stonebear finally fell silent, Grey Thunder raised a hand, and the murmurs that had begun among the gathered tribe ceased instantly. "Running Elk, son of many horses," Grey Thunder's voice carried easily across the suddenly silent camp. "Come forward." Running Elk dismounted smoothly, then helped Sarah down from her horse. She stood unsteadily, clutching both twins to her chest, her face pale but determined. Running Elk stepped before the chief and bowed his head respectfully, though not submissively. "Explain yourself," Grey Thunder commanded, speaking in English, a surprise that caused whispers to ripple through the crowd. The chief's use of the white man's tongue was deliberate, ensuring Sarah would understand what transpired. Running Elk raised his head, meeting Grey Thunder's gaze directly. "I found this woman, Sarah Coleman, and her infant children dying in the snow on sacred ground. The storm had destroyed her wagon. To leave them would have meant their certain death." His voice remained steady as he continued, "I chose to preserve innocent life, rather than preserve the letter of our law." Grey Thunder's eyes narrowed slightly. "Binu, you speak of choice, as if our sacred laws are matters for individual judgment." "I speak of the spirit behind our laws," Running Elk countered respectfully. "We honor the land because it gives life. Would the spirits of our ancestors wish us to let innocent children die upon it?" Stonebear stepped forward angrily. "He twists our beliefs to justify his weakness for white ways. The woman should never have been on sacred ground." Her presence was the original violation. Grey Thunder silenced him with a gesture, his attention now turning to Sarah. "Woman, you trespassed on lands forbidden to your kind. What say you?" Sarah swallowed hard, but met the chief's gaze with dignity. "I did not know these were sacred Apache lands, Chief Grey Thunder. The maps I had showed this as unclaimed territory. I was trying to reach my brother-in-law in Silver Creek after my husband died, leaving me with nowhere to go." She paused, then added, "I regret the trespass, but I cannot regret that Running Elk found us. Without him, my children and I would be dead." A murmur ran through the gathered tribe at her direct response. Few had expected such composure from a white woman facing Apache judgment. Morning Sky, still standing beside her father, studied Sarah with new intensity, her eyes lingering on the twins. Grey Thunder was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving from Sarah to Running Elk, then to the infants in her arms. Finally, he spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "This matter requires counsel. The elders must be consulted." He gestured to a small wickiup near his own. "The woman and her children will remain there. Under guard, Running Elk will be confined separately until judgment is passed." As two warriors stepped forward to escort Sarah away, she looked desperately toward Running Elk. He gave her the slightest nod, a promise that this was not the end, that he would find a way through whatever came next. Morning Sky watched this exchange, her perceptive eyes missing nothing. As Running Elk was led away in the opposite direction, she turned and entered her father's dwelling without a backward glance, her straight back and proud carriage revealing nothing of her thoughts. Night was falling over the Apache camp, bringing with it a chill that seeped into bones and hearts alike. The judgment that would determine all their fates would come with the new day. The wickiup where Sarah was taken was small but surprisingly warm, its interior lined with woven grass mats and animal hides that effectively blocked the winter draft. A small fire burned in a central pit, its smoke rising through a hole in the conical structure's peak. Two Apache women had silently brought her furs for bedding, a clay pot of water, and a wooden bowl containing a simple stew of beans and dried meat. They had avoided meeting her eyes, performing their duties with rigid efficiency before departing. Now Sarah sat alone with her twins, fear and exhaustion battling within her. Emma had fallen asleep quickly, but James remained fitful, his breathing still concerning, though improved from their time in the cave. Sarah hummed softly to him, the same lullaby her mother had sung to her as a child, trying to keep her own anxiety from transmitting to her son. "Sleep, my little one, sleep," she whispered, rocking him gently. "Tomorrow will be better." She didn't truly believe her own words. Outside, she could hear the low, rhythmic rumble of drums and male voices raised in discussion. The tribal council had convened, and her fate, along with Running Elk's, hung in the balance of their deliberations. Sarah closed her eyes, leaning back against the wicky-up wall. How had her life come to this point? 6 months ago, she'd been a farmer's wife in the Oklahoma Territory, excited about the twins growing inside her, planning their future with Thomas. Now she was a widow, a trespasser on Apache land, with 2 infants dependent entirely on her, and potentially responsible for the downfall of the man who had saved their lives. The guilt of that last thought weighed heaviest. Running Elk had risked everything for them. Strangers who meant nothing to him, outsiders forbidden by his most sacred laws. His compassion had transcended boundaries Sarah herself had been raised to believe impenetrable. The savage Apache of settlers' fearful stories had shown more humanity than many white men she had known. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft rustling of the wicky-up entrance. Sarah tensed, instinctively drawing James closer to her chest, her eyes darting to Emma sleeping nearby. A slender figure slipped inside, moving with fluid grace. It was the young woman who had stood beside Chief Grey Thunder, his daughter, Morning Sky. She was even more striking up close, her features delicately carved, her dark eyes intelligent and assessing. She wore a dress of soft deerskin adorned with intricate beadwork, and her long black hair fell in 2 braids over her shoulders. Morning Sky stood silently for a moment, studying Sarah with undisguised curiosity. Then, to Sarah's surprise, she spoke in careful, accented English. "Your babies, they well?" Sarah nodded cautiously. "Yes, thanks to Running Elk." Morning Sky's expression flickered at his name, but she maintained her composure. She knelt gracefully beside the fire, adding a small handful of herbs that released a pleasant, soothing aroma. "For the boy," she explained, gesturing to James, "help breathing." Sarah felt a rush of unexpected gratitude. "Thank you." Morning Sky nodded once, then studied Sarah more intently. "You know who I am." "Running Elk mentioned you," Sarah admitted carefully. "You're Chief Grey Thunder's daughter. I am to marry Running Elk when spring comes." Morning Sky's direct gaze never wavered. Or was. The implication hung between them, that Running Elk's actions had likely destroyed this arrangement. Sarah felt a renewed surge of guilt. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "if I had known the consequences." "He knew," Morning Sky interrupted, her voice matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "Under Running Elk knows our laws better than most. He chose anyway." Sarah shifted uncomfortably under the young woman's penetrating gaze. Why would he risk so much for strangers? Morning Sky was quiet for a long moment, the firelight casting shadows across her face. His mother died when he was young, 10 winters, fever sickness. White settlers nearby had medicine that might save her, but tribal law forbade seeking their help. His father obeyed law. She died. She paused, adding quietly, "Some wounds do not heal. They make a man who he is." The revelation stunned Sarah. Running Elk had never mentioned this tragic history, yet it explained so much about his refusal to leave them to die, his willingness to break sacred law rather than repeat the past. The council debates long time. Morning Sky continued, glancing toward the Wiki-Up entrance. Stone Bear speaks against Running Elk. Says weakness for white ways makes him unfit warrior, unfit husband. Her voice remained neutral, though Sarah thought she detected a subtle distaste when mentioning Stone Bear. "And what do you think?" Sarah asked carefully. Morning Sky's eyes returned to her, surprise flickering across her features, perhaps at Sarah's boldness, or perhaps that her opinion had been sought at all. "I think," she hesitated, choosing her words deliberately. "I think Running Elk is true Apache warrior. True warrior protects the weak, honors life, does not hide behind laws when heart knows right path." Her eyes lowered to James, still nestled against Sarah's chest. "Council may not see this way." Outside, the drums suddenly stopped. The change in atmosphere was palpable even within the Wiki-Up, a charged silence that indicated something significant had occurred. Morning Sky rose quickly, her posture alert. "I must go," she said, moving toward the entrance. She paused, looking back at Sarah. "Stay strong for babies. What comes next?" She shook her head slightly, leaving the sentence unfinished as she slipped outside. In the council lodge, the atmosphere was thick with tension. 12 tribal elders sat in a circle around a central fire, with Grey Thunder presiding from the position of honor. Running Elk knelt at the circle's edge, his posture respectful but unbowed, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts as the debate about his fate continued into the night. "The law is clear," Stone Bear insisted, standing before the council. "No outsiders on sacred ground, no mercy for trespassers. Running Elk has violated our most ancient traditions. The penalty must be severe." His eyes gleamed in the firelight as he added, "Banishment at minimum." Cloudwalker, seated among the elders, shook his head slowly. "We must consider the circumstances. Running Elk did not invite these outsiders onto our land. He found them already there, dying. The ancient laws also speak of compassion, of the sanctity of innocent life." "Compassion for our people," Stone Bear countered sharply. "Not for white settlers who take our lands, kill our game, bring their diseases and their false gods." He looked around the circle, his voice lowering to a persuasive tone. "Running Elk has always been drawn to white ways. 2 summers in their mission school, trading with their settlements, speaking their tongue. Now he brings a white woman into our sacred winter camp. Where does it end?" Several elders nodded in agreement, their faces grave. Running Elk remained silent, as was required during this portion of the council. Grey Thunder, who had listened impassively throughout, finally spoke. "Running Elk's father, Many Horses, was my blood brother. His son has been among our most respected warriors since he first earned his name, hunting the mountain lion that threatened our herds. His courage and wisdom have never before been questioned." The chief's eyes narrowed slightly. "I find it strange that some are so quick to cast aside his lifetime of honor for this one action." Stone Bear bristled at the implied criticism. "With respect, Chief Grey Thunder, no warrior is above our sacred laws, not even the son of Many Horses, not even the intended husband of your daughter." A murmur ran through the council at this bold statement. Grey Thunder's expression remained unreadable, but the slight tightening of his jaw suggested Stone Bear had stepped close to the boundaries of respect. "Tell me, Stone Bear," Cloudwalker interjected smoothly, If you had found the woman and her infants, what would you have done? I would have left them to the will of the spirits, Stone Bear answered without hesitation. Their trespass on sacred land sealed their fate. Even the children, asked a previously silent elder, Nightwalker, one of the oldest members of the tribe. Our ways have always honored the innocence of children, even those of our enemies. Stone Bear hesitated for the first time. The woman brought them there. Their fate was bound to hers by her actions. Nightwalker's ancient eyes studied Stone Bear thoughtfully. It is easy to speak of strict adherence to law when it benefits one's position. His gaze shifted meaningfully around the council. We all know that if Running Elk is banished or executed, Stone Bear would be next in line to marry Morning Sky. Stone Bear's face darkened with anger. You question my honor, my motives. I question the wisdom of judgment that comes too quickly, too conveniently. Nightwalker replied calmly. Grey Thunder raised his hand, silencing the rising murmurs. Running Elk, you have heard the council's debate. Now you may speak. Running Elk rose to his feet, his movements controlled and dignified. He looked around the circle, meeting each elder's gaze before he spoke. I stand before you not to deny what I have done, but to affirm it, he began, his voice clear and steady. I found Sarah Coleman and her children dying on our sacred land. I chose to help them live rather than let them die. If this is betrayal of our ways, then I accept whatever punishment the council deems fitting. He paused, his eyes moving to Grey Thunder. But I ask you this, what makes our land sacred? Is it not that it gives life, sustains our people, connects us to the spirits of all living things? If I had allowed innocent children to perish upon it when I had the power to save them, would that not have been the greater defilement? A profound silence followed his words. Even Stone Bear seemed momentarily without response. Grey Thunder studied Running Elk for a long moment before speaking again. The council will continue its deliberations until dawn. Running Elk will return to confinement. At sunrise, we will render judgment. As Running Elk was led from the council lodge, he caught a glimpse of Morning Sky standing in the shadows near her father's dwelling. Their eyes met briefly, a wordless exchange that contained questions, answers, and something deeper that neither had yet fully acknowledged. The longest night of Running Elk's life stretched before him as he was returned to the small storage wickiup where he was being held. Dawn would bring either redemption or ruin, not just for him, but for Sarah and her children as well. Dawn broke over the Apache winter camp in a wash of pale gold light. The snow-covered valley glittered as if strewn with tiny diamonds, the beauty of the landscape standing in stark contrast to the tension that permeated the air. Smoke rose from dozens of cooking fires as the tribe prepared for the day, but conversations were muted, eyes frequently turning toward the chief's dwelling where Grey Thunder had remained in council with the elders through the night. Sarah had barely slept. James had finally settled into a deeper sleep after Morning Sky's herbal remedy eased his breathing, but Sarah's mind had raced relentlessly, constructing and discarding desperate plans for escape should the judgment go against them. None seemed feasible. A weakened woman with 2 infants in the middle of winter in unfamiliar territory, surrounded by Apache warriors. Their fate rested entirely in the hands of people who had every reason to consider her an enemy. The twins stirred as the first light filtered through the wickiup smoke hole. Sarah fed them one after another, her movements mechanical, her thoughts distant. Outside, she could hear increasing activity, footsteps, voices, the sounds of the camp, preparing for something significant. When the entrance flap was pushed aside, she tensed, only to see the same two women who had brought her food the previous evening. This time, they carried a small basin of warm water and a bundle of cloth. "For washing," one of them said in halting English, gesturing to the basin. "Clean clothes." She pointed to the bundle. Sarah thanked them, surprised by this unexpected consideration. As they turned to leave, she impulsively called after them. "Please, what's happening? When will the council decide?" The women exchanged glances. The older one replied reluctantly, "Soon, Chief Grey Thunder summons everyone. You come when called." With that, they departed, leaving Sarah to wash hurriedly and change into the simple dress they had provided. Clearly a woman's Apache garment, but modified somewhat to accommodate her different build. She had just finished preparing herself and the twins when White Knife appeared at the entrance. The young warrior's expression was solemn as he gestured for her to follow him. Sarah gathered the twins, one in each arm, and stepped out into the morning light. The entire tribe had assembled in the central clearing of the camp. Men, women, and children stood in concentric circles around a large fire, their faces grave as they watched Sarah approach. At the innermost circle stood Grey Thunder, the council elders, and Running Elk. Sarah's heart leapt at the sight of him. He stood straight and proud, his expression revealing nothing, but his eyes found hers immediately. In that brief glance, she read both strength and apology, as if he would shield her from what was to come, if only he could. White Knife led her to stand beside Running Elk, then stepped back. The silence was absolute, broken only by Emma's occasional soft noises as she looked around with innocent curiosity. Grey Thunder stepped forward, his weathered face imposing in the morning light. He spoke first in Apache, his resonant voice carrying across the gathered crowd, then switched to English for Sarah's benefit. "The council has deliberated through the night on this matter of grave importance. Running Elk, son of many horses, has broken our most sacred law by bringing outsiders onto forbidden ground. This cannot be denied or dismissed." Sarah felt her heart sink, her arms tightening instinctively around her children. Beside her, Running Elk remained motionless, his gaze fixed on his chief. "However," Grey Thunder continued, "the circumstances are unique. The woman and her children did not willfully trespass, but were stranded by misfortune. Running Elk did not invite them onto our lands, but found them already there, facing certain death." He paused, his eyes moving deliberately from Running Elk to Sarah and the twins. "Our ancestors taught that life is sacred, all life." A murmur ran through the gathered tribe. Stone Bear, standing among the warriors, scowled openly, his hand resting on his knife hilt. "The judgment of the council is this," Grey Thunder declared. "Running Elk acted against the letter of our law, but in accordance with its spirit, he will not be banished or executed." Relief flooded through Sarah so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. Running Elk's posture relaxed almost imperceptibly, though his face remained composed. "However," Grey Thunder continued, raising his hand for silence as voices rose among the tribe, "there must be consequences. Running Elk will undergo ritual purification and will forfeit his place in the spring hunt. He will also forfeit his right to sit in council for one full cycle of seasons." These were significant penalties, Sarah realized, watching Running Elk's face. The spring hunt was an important spiritual and practical event for the tribe, and losing his voice in council meant surrendering his political influence for an entire year. Grey Thunder turned his attention to Sarah. As for the woman and her children, Stone Bear stepped forward suddenly. "Chief Grey Thunder, with respect, you cannot allow white settlers to witness our winter camp and leave to tell others. She knows our location, our defenses, our numbers." Grey Thunder's expression hardened at the interruption, but before he could respond, shouting erupted from the perimeter of the camp. A young scout raced toward the gathering, his face tight with urgency. "Riders," he called in Apache, "white men with guns, many horses." The camp exploded into activity. Warriors grabbed weapons, women hurried children toward shelter, and Grey Thunder barked rapid orders to organize their defense. Running, Elk turned to Sarah, gripping her shoulders firmly. "Take twins inside," he instructed urgently. "Stay hidden." "What's happening?" Sarah asked, fear constricting her throat as she clutched her babies closer. "Soldiers," Running Elk replied grimly. "Or settlers. Looking for you, maybe. Or just hunting Apache." Either possibility was equally terrifying. If they were indeed searching for her, her presence could bring destruction upon the very people who had just spared her life. If they were simply on an Apache hunt, not uncommon in these territories, then she and her children would be caught in the crossfire of a massacre. As White Knife hurried her back toward the wickiup, Sarah looked back to see Running Elk retrieving his bow and knife, his face transformed by a warrior's focus. Stone Bear stood nearby, his earlier animosity momentarily forgotten as both men prepared to defend their people against a common enemy. The judgment had been rendered, but there would be no time to process its implications. A new and deadlier threat was galloping toward them across the snow-covered valley. The Apache winter camp transformed with astonishing speed from a peaceful settlement to a defensive fortress. Warriors took up strategic positions behind rocks and fallen trees at the valley's edge. Women gathered children into the most protected wickiups, and elders who could still draw a bow joined the defensive line. Grey Thunder, despite his age, stood among his warriors, rifle in hand, one of the few modern weapons the tribe possessed. From her position inside the wickiup where White Knife had hurriedly deposited her, Sarah could see little of what was happening. The twins sensed her anxiety, both becoming increasingly fussy. She tried to soothe them while straining to hear what was occurring outside. Voices carried on the cold morning air, orders being given in Apache, the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats growing steadily louder. Then, unexpectedly, the entrance flap was pushed aside. Morning Sky slipped inside, carrying a small bundle. "Come," she said urgently. "Not safe here, too close to edge of camp." Sarah didn't question her, quickly gathering the twins. Morning Sky led her through the back of the wickiup, where she had silently cut a small opening in the hide covering. They crouched low, moving swiftly between structures until they reached a larger dwelling near the center of the camp. Inside, several elderly women and young children were already gathered. The oldest woman, her face deeply lined with age, nodded to Morning Sky, who guided Sarah to a corner partially concealed by hanging blankets. "Uddu, stay," Morning Sky instructed, unwrapping her bundle to reveal a small knife which she pressed into Sarah's hand. "For protection, if bad men come." The implication was clear. If the camp was overrun, Sarah might need to defend herself and her children. The weight of the blade felt alien in her hand, yet strangely comforting. Morning Sky's eyes met hers, a silent understanding passing between them before the young Apache woman slipped back outside. At the perimeter of the camp, Running Elk crouched behind a large boulder alongside Cloudwalker. They had a clear view of the valley approach, where a group of riders was now clearly visible, perhaps 15 men, a mixture of what appeared to be soldiers in partial uniform and civilians in heavy winter gear. Not a full military patrol, Cloudwalker observed quietly. "A irregular group." Running Elk nodded, studying the approaching party carefully. One man rode slightly ahead of the others, a tall figure with a full beard, wearing a heavy coat with a sheriff's badge partially visible. Beside him rode a younger man with a familiar profile that triggered a sudden realization in Running Elk. "The lead rider with the beard," he murmured to Cloudwalker. "Looks like the man in Sarah's locket. Her dead husband's brother, perhaps." This complicated matters significantly. If these men were searching for Sarah specifically, not simply hunting Apache as initially feared, there might be a way to avoid bloodshed. But mixed among what appeared to be a legitimate search party were men whose postures and weaponry suggested a readiness, perhaps even eagerness, for violence. Grey Thunder materialized beside them, his ancient rifle held casually but competently. "Speak your thoughts, Running Elk," he said, having noticed his warrior's intense focus on the approaching riders. "The man in front may be Sarah's husband's brother. She said she was traveling to join him when her wagon broke down." Running Elk chose his next words carefully. "If they seek only the woman and her children, perhaps blood need not be shed this day." Grey Thunder's weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "And if they have found what they sought, what stops them from returning with more men to destroy us?" It was a legitimate concern. White settlers discovering an Apache winter camp, regardless of the circumstances, rarely ended well for the Apache. "Let me speak to them," Running Elk said after a moment. "I know their language. If they have come for Sarah, I can negotiate her safe return." Stone Bear, positioned nearby, scoffed audibly. More evidence of his white sympathies. He would expose himself to enemy rifles on the chance they might listen. "I would prevent needless death on both sides," Running Elk replied evenly, though his eyes flashed with momentary anger. "Sarah and her children are innocent in this, and our warriors' lives are too valuable to waste if words might serve instead." Grey Thunder considered this briefly, then nodded once. "You may try words first, but at the first sign of treachery." He left the implication clear. Running Elk handed his bow to Cloudwalker and slowly stood, raising his empty hands high above his head. He stepped out from behind the boulder into clear view of the approaching riders, who immediately drew to a halt. He saw rifles raise, heard shouts of alarm. "I come to speak," he called out in clear English. "Who leads this party?" After a tense moment, the bearded man with the badge urged his horse forward a few paces. "Sheriff James Coleman of Silver Creek." "Who am I addressing?" The name confirmed Running Elk's suspicion. This was indeed Sarah's brother-in-law. "I am called Running Elk of the Black Mountain Apache," he replied steadily. "You enter our winter grounds heavily armed. What is your purpose here?" Sheriff Coleman's hand remained near his holstered pistol, but he kept his voice level. "We're tracking a woman and 2 infants, Sarah Coleman, my brother's widow, and her newborn twins. Their wagon was found abandoned 3 days' ride from here. We've been following signs of movement in this direction." Running Elk maintained his composed demeanor, though he was acutely aware of dozens of Apache arrows and the few rifles aimed at the search party from concealed positions. "The woman and her children are alive and unharmed," he said. A visible wave of relief passed over the sheriff's face. "Ah, thank God," he muttered, then louder. "I'm obliged to you if you've helped them. We'd like to take them home now." "The situation is complicated," Running Elk replied carefully. "The woman trespassed on sacred Apache land during the storm. By our law, this is forbidden. Our council has only just decided her fate when you arrived." The younger man beside Sheriff Coleman spurred his horse forward angrily. "What are you saying, Injun?" "That you're holding them prisoner, James, as we should—" "Quiet, Daniels," the sheriff snapped, raising a hand to restrain his companion. His eyes never left Running Elk as he asked, "What exactly did your council decide?" Before Running Elk could answer, a commotion arose from the camp behind him. He turned to see Sarah pushing past restraining hands, carrying her twins as she hurried toward him. Morning Sky followed close behind, her expression a mixture of alarm and resignation. "Sarah, stay back," Running Elk warned, but she ignored him, coming to stand beside him, facing the search party. "James," she called to the sheriff. "James, it's all right. They saved us." Sheriff Coleman's eyes widened at the sight of her. "Sarah, are you truly unharmed?" "The children, we're well," she assured him, shifting the twins in her arms so he could see their faces. Running Elk found us half dead in the snowstorm. He carried us to shelter, treated James's lung sickness, kept us alive until the storm passed. His people have been deciding our fate when your arrival interrupted them. The tension in the air remained palpable as Sarah's brother-in-law processed this information. The man called Daniels leaned toward the sheriff, whispering urgently, his hand still hovering near his weapon. Sarah sensed the precariousness of the moment. She turned slightly toward the Apache camp, where Grey Thunder now stood in plain view, dignified and unafraid. "Chief Grey Thunder," she called, her voice carrying clearly in the winter air, "these men have come for me and my children. They mean no harm to your people. Please, let me speak with my brother-in-law to prevent misunderstanding." After a brief pause, Grey Thunder nodded his permission. Sarah handed Emma to Morning Sky, who had come to stand supportively beside her, then walked forward slowly with James still in her arms. Running Elk moved with her, staying protectively at her side. When they stood midway between the two groups, Sheriff Coleman dismounted and approached on foot, leaving his pistol holstered in a deliberate show of peaceful intent. "Sarah," he said when they met, his eyes moving from her to Running Elk with undisguised wariness, "we've been searching for days when we found the wagon and the dead horse." He shook his head. "I feared the worst. We would have died without Running Elk," Sarah said firmly. "He broke his tribe's sacred laws to save us, James. He carried us through the blizzard, treated my son's sickness, kept us alive when no one else could have." Her voice softened. "These are not the savages we were raised to fear." Sheriff Coleman studied Running Elk with new consideration. "Then I owe you my gratitude," he said with grudging respect. "That my brother's children live because of you." Running Elk inclined his head slightly, but remained vigilant. The other riders were still armed and ready, and he knew the Apache warriors were equally prepared for violence. "Your arrival comes at a delicate time," he explained. "Our council had just decided that Sarah and the children would be allowed to leave in peace, despite their trespass on sacred ground. But your armed approach has raised new concerns." Sheriff Coleman frowned. "We came prepared for any situation. These mountains are dangerous, and not just from the weather." His eyes moved meaningfully toward the Apache camp. "James," Sarah interjected, recognizing the growing tension, "I need you to trust me. These people could have killed me when they found me on their sacred land. Instead, their council debated for hours and chose mercy. They're allowing us to leave freely, but we must respect their winter camp's location." She lowered her voice. "Some of your men look ready for a fight. Please don't let that happen." The sheriff studied her face, then looked back at his posse, where Daniels and several others were clearly agitating for action. He seemed to come to a decision. "All right," he said quietly. "What do you propose?" Sarah glanced at Running Elk, who spoke calmly. "Do you and 2 men of your choosing may enter our camp peacefully to collect Sarah's belongings. The rest remain here. You will be escorted back to the valley's edge, and you will tell no one of our winter camp's location." Sheriff Coleman considered this, then nodded slowly. "Agreed, but Sarah and the children ride out with us today." Running Elk's eyes met Sarah's for a brief moment, a glance laden with unspoken emotions. Then he turned back to the sheriff. Of course, that was always the intention of our council. As Sheriff Coleman returned to his men to select his companions and calm the more aggressive members of his posse, Sarah turned to Running Elk. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, her voice catching, "for everything." Running Elk's stoic expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You have shown courage worthy of an Apache warrior," he replied. "That is thanks enough." But something in his eyes told a different story. One of possibilities cut short, of a connection formed against all odds that circumstances would now sever. Standing between two worlds, Running Elk and Sarah had glimpsed something rare and precious that neither had expected to find. And now, as quickly as their paths had crossed, they would diverge again. She to return to her people, he to his. The brief bridge between their worlds already beginning to dissolve like footprints in melting snow. The Apache camp existed in a state of wary tension as Sheriff Coleman and his two chosen men, a middle-aged deputy and a younger man introduced as Sarah's cousin Michael, were escorted inside. The rest of the search party remained at a distance under the watchful eyes of Apache warriors, an uneasy truce holding between the groups. Sarah had been brought back to the wiki-up to gather her few belongings and prepare the twins for the journey ahead. Morning Sky accompanied her, ostensibly to ensure the white men didn't wander the camp. But the bond that had formed between the women made the task feel more personal than duty. "Your brother Spirit Man seems honorable," Morning Sky observed quietly as she helped Sarah wrap Emma in additional layers against the winter cold. Sarah nodded, glancing toward the entrance where she could glimpse James Coleman speaking with Grey Thunder, their conversation facilitated by Running Elk's translation. "He is, Thomas always said his brother was the better man between them." She smiled sadly. "More patient. Wiser." Morning Sky's perceptive eyes studied Sarah's face. "You will be safe with him." "Yes," Sarah assured her. "James has a good home in Silver Creek, a trading post with rooms above it. He wrote to us often, asking us to join him there." Her voice faltered slightly. "I should have accepted sooner, before Thomas's debts grew so large. Before..." She trailed off, looking down at James in her arms, his tiny face peaceful in sleep. Morning Sky knelt beside her, adjusting the blanket around the infant with surprising tenderness. Past path cannot be re-walked. Only new path matters now. She hesitated, then removed a small beaded pouch from around her neck. "For the boy. Medicine herbs, mix with water when breathing troubles come." Sarah accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. For this, and for your kindness when you had every reason to hate me." Morning Sky's expression remained composed, but something flickered in her dark eyes. "Hate easier than understanding, but makes smaller heart." She glanced toward the entrance, where Running Elk's voice could be heard explaining something to the sheriff. "But he teaches this by what he does, not just words." The implication was clear. Running Elk's compassion had influenced Morning Sky's own response, despite the cost to their arranged marriage. Before Sarah could respond, the wiki-up flap opened and Sheriff Coleman ducked inside. "The chief says we can leave whenever you're ready, Sarah," he said, his eyes taking in the modest Apache dwelling with barely concealed unease. "My men are getting restless out there, so sooner would be better than later." Sarah nodded, rising with James in her arms. Morning Sky silently gathered Emma, helping to secure both twins in the carrying blanket the Apache women had fashioned, a practical sling that would allow Sarah to carry both infants against her chest while riding. "I'm ready," Sarah said, though the words felt hollow, incomplete. There was still one farewell she wasn't prepared for, one conversation she wasn't sure how to have. As if reading her thoughts, Morning Sky spoke softly in Apache to Sheriff Coleman, who looked to Sarah for translation. "She's asking if you could wait outside for a moment," Sarah explained. "There are proper ways to leave an Apache dwelling, respectful ways." It wasn't entirely a lie. There were indeed Apache customs surrounding departures, though Sarah knew Morning Sky was creating this opportunity for other reasons. Sheriff Coleman nodded stiffly and stepped outside, his discomfort with the entire situation evident in his rigid posture. Once he had gone, Morning Sky moved to the entrance but paused before leaving. "I will send him," she said simply, her eyes meeting Sarah's with quiet understanding before she slipped outside. Sarah stood alone in the wickiup, the twins secured against her chest, her heart beating rapidly as she waited. She didn't have to wonder who him was. Moments later, the entrance flap moved aside, and Running Elk stepped in. He seemed somehow larger within the confines of the small dwelling, his presence filling the space in a way that made Sarah acutely aware of him. They stood in silence for a moment, neither seemingly able to find the right words to begin. "Your brother by marriage will take good care of you," Running Elk finally said, his deep voice soft in the quiet space. Sarah nodded. "Yes, James is a good man." She hesitated, then added, "But he's not the one who saved us." Running Elk's stoic expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You would have found another way. You have the heart of a survivor." "No," Sarah said with sudden fierceness. "We would have died in that snow. My children would have died." Her voice caught. "I need you to know that I understand what you sacrificed for us. Your position in the tribe, your marriage arrangement, your honor." "I sacrificed nothing that matters," Running Elk interrupted gently. "Honor is not in following laws blindly. It is in doing what is right, even when difficult." Sarah took a step closer to him, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I will never forget you," she whispered. "I'll tell Emma and James about the Apache warrior who defied his people's most sacred law to save their lives. I'll make sure they know that courage and compassion exist in all peoples, not just our own." Something flickered in Running Elk's dark eyes, a depth of emotion that his controlled features couldn't fully conceal. Slowly, he reached out and touched one of the twins' heads with gentle fingers. "They are strong," he said softly, "like their mother." The moment stretched between them, filled with all the things that could never be said, all the possibilities that could never be explored. They were from different worlds that allowed no bridge between them, a reality both understood all too clearly. Finally, Running Elk reached beneath his tunic and withdrew a small object, a carved wooden amulet on a leather cord. "For protection," he said, placing it in Sarah's palm and closing her fingers around it. "Apache medicine, keep babies safe." Sarah clutched the amulet tightly, feeling the warmth of his hand lingering on hers. "I have nothing to give you in return." "You already have," he replied simply. Without elaborating, he stepped back, his warrior's composure returning. "It is time." Outside, the camp had gathered to witness their departure. Grey Thunder stood with the council elders, his expression inscrutable, as Sarah emerged from the wickiup with Running Elk close behind. Stone Bear watched from a distance, his hostility muted but still evident in his rigid posture. Morning Sky stood near her father, her eyes meeting Sarah's briefly with a small nod of acknowledgement. Sheriff Coleman and his men had already mounted their horses, with a fourth horse saddled and waiting for Sarah. The rest of the search party remained at the valley's edge, a tension in their postures, suggesting their patience was wearing thin. As White Knife helped Sarah mount while carefully managing the twins in their sling, Grey Thunder approached. The elderly chief studied her for a moment, then spoke in Apache, Running Elk translated. Silver Chief Grey Thunder says, "You came to our sacred land as trespassers, but you leave as someone who has been judged by Apache law and found worthy of life. Remember this when you speak of our people to your own." Sarah bowed her head respectfully toward the chief. "Or tell him I will honor the mercy his council has shown, and I will never reveal the location of this camp to anyone." After Running Elk translated, Grey Thunder nodded once, then turned to Sheriff Coleman. "Go in peace," he said in surprisingly clear English, "but do not return." The sheriff tipped his hat respectfully. "You have my word, Chief." As the small party prepared to depart, Sarah turned in her saddle for one final look at Running Elk. He stood tall among his people, a man caught between worlds yet somehow transcending both. Their eyes met across the distance, a silent communication passing between them that needed no translation. Then Sheriff Coleman gave the signal, and they were moving, riding away from the Apache camp toward the valley's edge, where the rest of the search party waited. Sarah kept her gaze forward, focusing on the path ahead, the future that awaited her and her children in Silver Creek. The twins remained quiet against her chest, perhaps soothed by the gentle rocking motion of the horse. Only once, when they reached the far side of the valley and began the ascent toward the ridge, did Sarah allow herself to look back. The Apache camp was just a collection of small shapes now, smoke rising in thin columns against the snow-covered landscape. She couldn't distinguish individual figures at this distance, couldn't tell if Running Elk still watched their departure or had already turned back to the life that awaited him. It was better this way, she told herself. Cleaner. Their worlds had collided briefly, intensely, but they were never meant to merge. She had her children to think of, a future to build. He had his people, his traditions, his path as a warrior. Yet as she turned away for the final time, the wooden amulet pressed against her skin beneath her clothes, and Sarah couldn't help but feel that something profound and irreplaceable was being left behind in that valley. Something beyond gratitude, beyond the dramatic circumstances of their meeting. Something that in another life, another world, might have had the chance to grow into something beautiful. "You all right, Sarah?" Sheriff Coleman asked, noting her lingering gaze. She nodded, adjusting the twins against her chest. "Yes," she said quietly, "I'm just saying goodbye." 4 months later, spring 1876. Silver Creek had blossomed with the arrival of spring. The small frontier settlement bustled with renewed activity as winter's grip finally released the mountain town. Traders arrived with fresh supplies, farmers prepared fields for planting, and children played in the muddy streets under the watchful eyes of mothers who had endured the long, isolated winter. Coleman's trading post stood at the center of town, its freshly painted sign swinging gently in the spring breeze. Inside, Sarah moved efficiently behind the counter, measuring fabric for Mrs. Hollister, the minister's wife. In the 4 months since her arrival in Silver Creek, Sarah had become an integral part of her brother-in-law's business, her quick mind for numbers and natural charm, with customers proving invaluable. "That's 2 yards exactly," Sarah said, cutting the calico with practiced precision. "Will there be anything else today, Mrs.?" Hollister shook her head, her eyes drifting to the corner of the store where Emma and James played in a wooden pen James Coleman had crafted. The twins had thrived in their new environment, growing plump and strong. James's breathing troubles had diminished with the warmer weather, though Sarah still prepared the herbal remedy Morning Sky had given her whenever the symptoms threatened to return. "They're getting so big," Mrs. Hollister remarked. "Hard to believe they're the same sickly infants you arrived with at Christmas," Sarah smiled, wrapping the fabric in brown paper. "They're fighters, both of them. After the customer departed, Sarah's brother-in-law emerged from the storeroom, wiping dust from his hands. "That's the last of the spring inventory logged," he announced. "Best season opening we've had in years." "The town is growing," Sarah observed, tidying the counter. "Sheriff Daniels mentioned 3 new families arriving next month." James Coleman nodded, his expression growing more serious. "Which reminds me, that army officer who was here yesterday, Major Holloway, he was asking questions about the Apache winter camp again." Sarah's hands stilled. "What did you tell him?" "Same as always, that we found you delirious from cold, with no clear memory of where you'd been." He lowered his voice, though the store was empty of customers. "I've kept my word, Sarah. No one knows what really happened out there, but the army's getting more determined to locate the remaining hostile bands before summer." Sarah felt the familiar weight of the wooden amulet against her skin, hidden beneath her dress. She wore it always, a secret reminder of the man who had saved her and her children at tremendous personal cost. "They're not hostile," she said quietly. "They're just trying to protect their way of life." James studied his sister-in-law thoughtfully. "You know, when we first found you, I half expected you'd be traumatized, filled with stories of Apache savagery. Instead," he shook his head slightly, "you came back different, Sarah. Stronger somehow, and with a perspective I never expected." Sarah looked toward her children, watching Emma deliberately hand a wooden toy to her brother in an act of sharing that made Sarah's heart swell with pride. "I learned that courage and compassion aren't confined to any one people," she said. "I try to remember that lesson every day. Miles away, in the greening foothills where the Black Mountain Apache had established their spring camp, Running Elk stood alone on a ridge overlooking the valley. The season of renewal had transformed the landscape, covering the once snow-laden terrain with new grass and wildflowers. In the distance, a herd of deer grazed peacefully, unaware of his presence. According to tradition, he should have been leading the spring hunt, guiding the younger warriors in the ceremonial pursuit that honored both the animals who gave their lives and the spirits who made such bounty possible. Instead, he stood as an observer, his punishment still in effect. The council had been firm in their judgment, and Running Elk had accepted it without complaint. He heard footsteps approaching from behind, light, deliberate, familiar. "The hunters return soon," Morning Sky said, coming to stand beside him on the ridge. "Many deer, good omens." Running Elk nodded but remained silent. Their relationship had changed since the winter events, evolving into something neither had anticipated. Grey Thunder had officially dissolved their marriage arrangement, freeing Morning Sky to accept Stone Bear's long-standing petition. Yet she had surprised everyone by refusing him, declaring her intention to wait another year before considering any match. "My father asks if you will join the council fire tonight," she continued. "Not to speak, just to listen." It was a small concession, but significant, the first indication that his period of exclusion might be softening. Running Elk turned to look at her. "And what does Stone Bear say to this?" A hint of a smile touched Morning Sky's lips. "He speaks against it, which is why more elders support it." Stone Bear's influence had waned in recent months. His eagerness for conflict during the confrontation with the White Search Party had troubled many of the older council members, who valued survival over displays of warrior pride. In contrast, Running Elk's willingness to negotiate, to find a peaceful resolution, had quietly earned him renewed respect among those who looked beyond traditional law to the tribe's future. "I will come," Running Elk decided. "It is good to listen when one has much to learn." Morning Sky studied him with her perceptive gaze. You still think of them. The white woman and her children. It wasn't a question, and Running Elk didn't treat it as one. Morning Sky had always seen more than others, understood things left unspoken. They are well, she continued. This, I feel, your protection travels with them. Running Elk's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where his own amulet rested, the twin to the one he had given Sarah. Some paths cross only briefly, he said quietly, but leave tracks that remain. Morning Sky nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. Cloud Walker says you will lead hunters again next season, that your time of watching ends when summer comes. The Council decides such things, not Cloud Walker alone. The Council listens to him, and he says your action in winter shows true Apache heart, protecting the weak, honoring life. She used the same words she had spoken to Sarah months before. Many now see wisdom in this, even if law was broken. Below them in the valley, the hunting party came into view, returning with their bounty. Young warriors carried deer across their shoulders, their success evident in their proud bearing. Soon the camp would be busy with preparation, the meat distributed according to tradition, the hides cleaned and tanned by skilled hands. Life continued. The tribe adapted. Even traditions, once thought immutable, evolved when necessity demanded it. Come, Morning Sky said, turning back toward camp. There is work to be done. Running Elk lingered a moment longer, his eyes drawn to the distant mountains beyond which lay Silver Creek. Then he followed Morning Sky down the ridge, returning to his people and the life that awaited him there. Summer had fully embraced Silver Creek by the time Sarah received the unexpected visitor. She was alone in the trading post, James having taken the twins to the doctor for their regular checkup, when the bell above the door jingled softly. She looked up from her ledger to see an elderly Apache man standing just inside the entrance. Her heart leapt to her throat, recognizing him immediately. Cloud Walker, one of the tribal elders who had been present throughout her ordeal. You, she whispered, instinctively glancing out the window to see if anyone had noticed his arrival. Cloud Walker inclined his head slightly. The woman who survived snow, he said in halting but clear English. Sarah. She moved from behind the counter cautiously. How did you find me? Why are you here? Then, with sudden anxiety, has something happened to Running Elk? The elder raised a weathered hand. Running Elk lives, sends no message. He reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather. I bring this for the children. Sarah accepted the package with trembling hands. Unwrapping it carefully, she revealed 2 tiny moccasins, expertly crafted from the softest deerskin, adorned with beadwork of extraordinary detail. Morning Sky makes, Cloud Walker explained, says children should walk strong path between 2 worlds. Sarah traced the beadwork with her fingertip, recognizing the intricate pattern as similar to the design on Running Elk's amulet. This is too precious a gift, she said softly. Cloud Walker shook his head. Not gift, return. You give us something also. What did I give? Sarah asked, genuinely confused. The elder's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the closest thing to a smile his dignified bearing would allow. At new eyes, some Apache now see differently because of what happened. Some white people too. Yes. Sarah thought of her brother-in-law, who had kept his promise to protect the Apache winter camp's location despite pressure from the army. She thought of the stories she told the twins each night, teaching them about the people who had saved their lives when they were too young to remember. Yes, she agreed quietly. Some do see differently now. Cloud Walker nodded, satisfied. Small change, like small stream. Over time makes path through stone. He moved toward the door, his purpose apparently fulfilled. Tell children their Apache name when they walk. Emma is Sunrise Hope. James is Winter Survivor. Before Sarah could respond, the bell jingled again, and Cloud Walker was gone, disappearing down an alley before anyone in the street could take particular notice of him. Sarah clutched the tiny moccasins to her chest, feeling the familiar weight of the wooden amulet beneath her dress. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to wonder what life might have been like had circumstances been different. Had she and Running Elk been born to the same world instead of worlds divided by history, prejudice, and misunderstanding? But such thoughts served no purpose. Their paths had crossed when both needed the other most, creating a bridge between their separate worlds that, while temporary, had changed them both forever. The lasting impact of that crossing would live on in the stories she told, in the values she instilled in her children, in the small acts of understanding that might, as Cloud Walker suggested, eventually carve new paths through the stone of old hatreds. That evening, as silver moonlight spilled through the window of the room above the trading post, Sarah placed the tiny moccasins beside her sleeping twins. In the morning, she would begin teaching them their Apache names, adding another strand to the story that would shape their understanding of the world. Your lives began in the space between two worlds, she whispered to her sleeping children. May you help build bridges where others see only chasms. Outside, a warm summer breeze carried the scent of pine and promise through Silver Creek, while miles away, beneath the same moon, Running Elk sat by the council fire, his voice once again welcomed among his people as they faced the ever-changing future together. Some stories have no true ending, only new beginnings born from the courage to see beyond boundaries and the compassion to reach across them. This was such a story, unfinished, ongoing, alive in the hearts of those who dared to write it with their choices and their lives.